Welcome to the Magic of Positive Thinking, a podcast hosted by Norb Savannasini, founder of AmericanEagle.com, and writer Al Edwards. Norb, they say April showers bring May flowers, but now we still have showers in May. What's going on?
Well, we didn't have many showers in April.
That's true.
You know?
So we need to make up for it.
We've gone through a drought here that is kind of interesting because it usually rains a lot in April, but it didn't this April.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful day. I thank God for, this gift he gives us every day. And we should start the day doing that, Thank for this gift we get every day.
We say it every show, but It could not be more and more true every time if you really start to think about it and appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So how you been? I haven't seen you for a while.
Good. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Well, friends, I always like to count our shows, apparently. I do it every time, but this is number 39, which is pretty significant. And we hope we have a fun show for you today. And the title of our show today is, This is Not a Dress Rehearsal. Your Life is Right Now. And I think for a lot of reasons we're going to talk about, people seem to put their life on hold until something happens or they get somewhere else or whatever the case may be. But this is all we got, baby, right here.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that today I was listening to the radio and there's a very famous actor, which I will not name because I don't want to get involved in a lawsuit or something. But he has a daughter that is obviously very, very wealthy because she comes from a Hollywood couple that is very, very wealthy. And the daughter actually is on a crusade to teach every 4-year-old about weather and global warming and weather problems. And I was thinking to myself, with all this stuff that's going on, I mean, can you imagine anybody who wants to teach a 4-year-old to start fearing something?
Right, like the world was going to end.
Yeah, fearing anything.
Yeah.
I mean, why should a 4-year-old fear anything? They got enough times to worry later on in life,
Why burden them? Why burden them?
Yeah, with something that she feels is important.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting because these people, because they have a lot of money and because they're influential, they think that, we have to talk about the important things, which are the things I decide that are important.
Right.
Which is really an insult to the intelligence of humanity, It really is.
Well, and it kind of ties into exactly what we're talking about, because these kind of ideas about what's going to happen in the future, you're wasting the now.
Yeah, you mean in the U.S. you used to tell every kid you can become president.
Right.
And it has become true. I mean, we've lived through an era where a lot of people that in past times you would never think they could become president.
Right.
They have become president. So, it's a horrible, horrible thing to do to a child because, the child has a brain, and we've talked about this before, and I hope to repeat it every show. At that age, it's been proven that every kid has the capacity to be a genius in later life.
Right.
So if we start, digging into this brain that is like soil, negative thoughts, people, they'll get negative results.
Well, and that's the thing, life, as we know, is full of wonderful things, but it has its share of strife and problems. Why burden a child with stuff like that?
Yeah.
Let him be a kid.
And, we live in a world today where anxiety is one of the most common things that are talked about. My son, he was anxious. He had anxiety problems. My daughter had anxiety problems. I have anxiety. The only anxiety I always remember, which I still have, by the way, everybody has anxiety. But, I drive quite a bit, and anxiety is that when you're driving 2 hours and you're 10 miles from a place where you have to go to the bathroom. And the anxiety it causes is just unbelievable. And it just shows you how things like that can really, really affect your mind. You cannot control that.
No.
You cannot. Trust me on this one. I've tried, okay?
You could drink less water.
It doesn't matter. When it's 10 miles away and 10 minutes away, you don't get
matter.
really anxious. Yeah,
right.
yeah. And by the time you park your car, the anxiety becomes almost unbearable.
You're like paralyzed.
Yeah. So you have to sit in the car, wait for the anxiety to pass a little bit so you can walk into the place, So don't think that when we talk about this, it doesn't occur to us.
Absolutely.
Maybe in different areas, but it does. Anxiety is part of life. And whenever we can, we should try to control it. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Absolutely. And when you're sitting in the car finally waiting for the anxiety to pass, you hope that's the only thing that passes is the anxiety.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that's funny because that ties in exactly to what we're talking about today. And that is people putting their life on hold because they're afraid of something or they don't want to take risks. And, getting back to our title, the quote, "This is not a dress rehearsal," is often used to emphasize that life is real and should be lived fully without hesitation or fear of failure. It suggests that each moment is unique and the only thing that matters is right now.
Yeah, I actually, we don't prepare for the show too much, but we do have an idea of what we're going to talk about. And because we've talked to so many things, we try to get something original. So I actually did a Google on anxiety, problems with anxiety, which is kind of interesting because it's just incredible the amount of articles written on this. And some guy, and I don't know who he is or anything, he's a real nice guy that has a history with anxiety, and he's relating 10 things that he did to overcome anxiety and how many kinds of anxieties there are. And what you were saying about the worry one is interesting because one of the things about worrying, people worry about a lot of things. But the one thing we have to understand is that there's a great book that's probably 100 years old right now.
I was just thinking of that book.
How to Stop Worrying and Start Living.
By Dale Carnegie.
And I got to tell you, one of the sad things about society is that we don't treasure these books. If somebody would write something like that today, they'd probably say, you're crazy. This is a different time. No, it's not. It's the same. You're human. 100 years ago, they were humans. They had the same feelings. They actually had a lot of other worries that we don't have, like food wasn't as plentiful as it is today. And nobody had air conditioning and nobody had cars. A few cars 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So, everything is relative. And you have to understand this. This is a fact. 95 to 98% of the stuff you worry about never happens.
Right.
So, I think starting the day is very, very important. I was thinking about this because, I always thank every day for this gift that we're given. And if you start the day with that thought, it really, really helps. And I was thinking, well, how could I tell people what to do for that? And, I really believe in simplicity in life. Humans try to make everything very complicated. Get a piece of paper, an 8 by 12 piece of paper, get a marker or a pencil if you don't have a marker, and write on it, I am going to thank for this gift I'm getting today. And, put it in some place that, going to the bathroom as soon as you get up. I think most people do that. Put it on the door there, and it reminds you. So if you start thanking for this gift, you'll feel better. I guarantee you'll feel better.
You mean like a gratitude list of things you're grateful for?
No, just that.
Just that one thing.
Yeah, just one thing. Because that basically it's the common denominator
that you woke up today.
And,
Right.
and think positively. Think, gee, this is a new gift, a new day.
Right.
And yeah, you're going to worry about things. Everybody worries. I mean, everybody worries. So minimize it. Say, I'm not the only one that has this worry. I'm not the only one. If you don't believe me, Google this stuff. I mean, it's thousands of articles about, and even the Mayo Clinic has a thing about anxiety, and some of it, of course, is mental, which has genetic, derivative.
Mm-hmm.
But most of it is just we do it to ourselves. But it's normal. So, just get out of it. Just don't think of good things. Think
Right.
of the things that you have.
Right. You said something really interesting that I never really thought of before, and maybe it's because at least in the United States, for most people, materially we are so well off now that we don't have anything else to worry about. So we worry about all these other things. Like you said, 150 years ago, they were worried about freezing to death.
Yeah.
Or not eating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or their crop was not going to make it this year, or their child was not going to make it. Sometimes I walk through cemeteries because I like the history and everything. And 100 years ago, and this, so many young children died.
Oh, yeah. It's very common to hear about, 100, 150 years ago that a woman had 7 children and 3 survived.
Yeah, exactly.
So death of a child, even when they were young, 2, 3 years old, was something commonplace. And today, luckily we live in an era where that is really minimal. It happens, but it's very minimal. I don't know of any one of my friends that had a child, in the first 2 years of their lives, and I'm glad. But
thank God
it was a very common thing, and and when you start talking about negativity, and the news today are just unbearable. It's kind of funny because we mentioned this thing about global warming with this young girl, and somebody sent me a CBS News with what was the guy's name of 1982.
Oh, Cronkite?
No.
Dan Rather?
Dan Rather,
okay, yeah.
Where he was announcing that, Antarctica, the ice was melting so fast that they were predicting this incredible Florida
Ice age.
half,
Yeah.
and Florida, half of it was going to be underwater and all this stuff. And in the last 3-4 years, Antarctica has grown beyond belief. They don't even know why there's so much ice all of a sudden. Millions and millions of acres are being covered by more and more ice. So, there's I don't know the Irish saying, but it's something like, worry about things you can change, and don't worry about things you cannot change.
Right.
And I don't know how it goes exactly, but that's basically it. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in this ball going through space, and believe it or not, there's not one human that can alter the weather. There's just no way. I mean, we just have to hope for the best, that the sun or the earth doesn't crash into something that we don't know anything about. So,
I think you may have been referring to the what they call the serenity prayer, which I think is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Fantastic. I admire your memory with that one.
Well,
but
thank you.
It's true. It's a great saying.
Yeah, it really is true.
And it's just basic, Yeah. And you have to think like that. One of the things about anxiety that I read is that a lot of people worry about what people think of them. This is one of the anxiety things that I read about. If somebody looks at you differently, and this thing that I was reading, they explained this. Some people have anxiety because somebody looks at them in such a way that they feel uncomfortable.
Right.
Well, again, I don't really care how somebody looks at me, and you shouldn't either.
Right.
And what is it that, and it's very funny because I actually met a guy one time that had a lawsuit, and he was having a trial. And there was a lady that was the prosecutor. And this guy was a phenomenal poker player, and he knew about tells and things like that. And he made it a point to look at that lady's, the prosecutor, at her feet. Whenever she said anything, he would look at her feet. And it totally destroyed her. She couldn't even remember what she was going to say, because anytime she referred to anything and would look at him, he would be looking at her feet. So in her mind was, what's wrong with my feet?
She was terrified of what he was thinking about her shoes or whatever.
Instead of saying, I don't give a darn what this guy is looking at, I'm going to, psychologically, you can do this to a person.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting, but if you really want to bother a person, which I don't endorse, by the way, but it's kind of funny, look at his or her forehead while you're talking to him. It will drive him up the wall. And if you know this, you tell him, why are you looking at my forehead? Or look at their forehead,
Right.
But don't let stuff like this worry you. Because it's just, it's just part of life.
That's funny. Well, I'll tell you, in the last 20 years or so, looking at my forehead is a full-time job.
Well, it's a lot bigger than it used to be. Yeah. You could land a plane in that.
Yeah. I have a 5-head now instead of a 4-head. So,
yeah.
Anyway, well, let's get into this fear thing, because I think Norb, you really hit it on the head there. That why people are putting off their life instead of really living it. And I found this, which was really interesting. And fear, as you said, has a big part of this. Here's a breakdown of what it means to live as if life is not a dress rehearsal. So if you really want to start living your life instead of putting it off, here are some tips. Prioritize what matters. Identify your core values and goals and ensure your actions align with them. Don't spend time on things that don't bring you joy or fulfillment. Control what goes into your mind. And we've been talking about that for 39 shows.
Again, going back to the anxiety thing about driving, there are anxieties that you can't control. And it's because we talk about mind control here a lot. I really make it a point to try not to let that bother me. But if I'm 10 miles from that spot, man, it dominates me. But I accept it.
Right.
It's nothing to worry about. It happens to you. It happens to everybody that I know. I mean, it's just human nature. I was married for a long time, and I had a wonderful wife, and I would tell her, she would get mad at me at this, probably get mad if she knew I was talking about this, but before we left the restaurant or something, I said, did you go to the bathroom? And she would say, what do you think, I'm a child? Right. And I said, no, but I know what's going to happen when we
on
get
the way home,
to
you're
the
going to have
house.
to stop.
Yeah. So it's normal. It happens to everybody. Accept it as part of life. I worry, you worry about, oh my God, what's going to happen tomorrow? They're predicting a huge storm, and we'll cope with it.
Absolutely. And by the way, I saw many, many times your wonderful wife, Charlene, get mad at you, and it was always very entertaining because she was very animated. And
yeah, right.
Would yell a little bit.
Yeah.
So, well, that's the second thing, actually. It says to live in the moment and not put your life on hold. Take risks and chase your dreams. Don't let fear or doubt hold you back from pursuing your passions. This is your one shot. So embrace the unknown and step outside of your comfort zone. And I think we had a show early on called No One's Getting Out of This Thing Alive.
Yeah.
This is our one shot.
Oh, yeah, this is it. And, here's another thing that this guy said, which I like to intermix this because this applies.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest problems with anxiety is that you're limiting your ability. And you can do anything. We've talked about this before. Henry Ford only went to the 4th grade. And Thomas Edison, they thought he was an idiot at school.
Right.
And luckily, they had, on both cases, their mother was the positive factor that told them, you can do anything. Okay. And this is just, something that's priceless. Limiting your mind is probably the most horrible thing you can do as a human, because it's the one thing that separates us from the animals.
That's right.
So
we've talked about how animals are like robots. They just act
they
on
are.
instinct.
Yeah. It's we talked about how birds build their nests and they know how to do it.
Yeah. They don't have to go to college for 20 years.
We don't know how to build a house. We have to be taught or yeah. So, it's interesting. But over worrying is one of the key elements of anxiety. Over worrying. We don't say you shouldn't worry. We don't say that, But when you just take it to the nth degree, then it destroys you.
And that's why I love about our show is that we are realistic about things, that we do get in bad moods and we do get depressed and we will worry, but you can take steps to help yourself get out of that to a large degree, like a gratitude list or focusing on something else or going to help someone else. You can help your mind get away from some of that stuff.
Absolutely. I know all this is what the show is all about, the magic of positive thinking. It's magical because it's like taking a rabbit out of a hat, Where'd that rabbit come from? Well, that guy put it there somehow. Okay. And we have to put good thoughts and good attitudes in our minds to produce that result. It's simple. It's not.
It really is.
Nuclear science. I mean, it isn't.
Norb, this is one of these tips that I'm looking at right here. This is something that you have done consistently your entire life. And it says, with regard to not being a dress rehearsal, and this is your life, don't wait for, quote, someday. Recognize that the perfect time may never come. Start acting now on what you want to achieve, whether it's starting a business, pursuing a hobby, or building meaningful relationships. Of all the things that I've known you've done in your life, business and other areas, you just went and did it. You didn't wait till the perfect time or the stock market reached or whatever, right?
Pretty much so. Yeah, I have to say that pretty much so. Yeah, because, I had a father that was a big influence in me. He was an engineer and he had a sign on his desk that says, "Do it now."
Wow.
Which, as a kid, you see it. And again, if you didn't get that, do it for your kids.
Right.
Have little quotes like that. I have quotes all over my desk. Al knows this. And they're quotes that are really motivational. And I read them almost every day, and I really like to read them. But yeah, if you didn't have that the luck, I guess, you do it for other people. Here's an interesting thing. We never talked about this, but if you're a miserable person, try to make somebody that you love not as miserable.
Right.
By giving them good, nice quotes, because it lifts you up.
Be the opposite of what you don't want to be.
Exactly. I mean, and that's a positive way to look at if you can't cope with this stuff, And, people, we live in a wonderful, wonderful world with very few real problems. I mean, through through the advances that we have and the health and food, the availability, the hot water that comes out of the faucet that we took before, our problems are nothing compared to somebody 150 years ago or so. Nothing.
And maybe that's why anxiety about a lot of other things other than survival has just exploded.
Exactly.
That's
Survival used to be a real fear.
Right.
Okay, and that is a real fear. I mean, if you don't have food, you have a problem. But today, you go to the market and you got 25 different jars of cherry jelly. I mean, it's
right.
Yeah.
In 1850, up in Minnesota, where our good friend Brian, our producer, is from, if you were in a log cabin and it was 10 below zero and you didn't have enough wood, that's what you call a problem.
Yeah, and you had to go out and get it.
Right.
There was none of this, well, I'm going to wait for the perfect time. That's another thing about anxiety. That one of the things this guy talked about was that, people wait for the right time to do something.
Right.
So that time never comes because there is no right time. And what you made the comment about me, I didn't think about that. But yeah, there is no right time. When you do something, you just got to do it. That's all.
Well, and that's this whole idea of not putting your life on hold. This is not a dress rehearsal. This is it.
Yeah.
I'll never forget years ago, long before I had my son, I was living in Georgia. And when I first got in the insurance business, actually, and a 22-year-old young lady named Tammy, I was saying, my wife and I are trying to think about a baby, but we can't afford it and this and that and everything. And she said to me, I'll never forget this, you'll never be able to have the right time. You'll never be able to afford it. So just do it. And that's kind of this thing.
That's very true because people used to marry a lot younger. I married very young and we had a child right away. And I'm really happy about that. By the time my wife and I were 50, our kids were out of the house.
Yeah.
And today you see people in their 40s having kids. And I say, oh my God, that guy really does have a problem. He's got to have anxiety problems for real, And that was one of the, everything in life balances. If you want to read something interesting, read Emerson's Law of Compensation. It's just nobody reads Ralph Waldo Emerson anymore, but he had a phenomenal theory that life compensates for everything. If you have money, you worry about keeping that money and you guard the money and you have a problem that you have to have a safe and you have to get insurance. If you don't have money, your problem is how to get money. So that's the compensation. You're never going to be away from that compensation. Whatever you have a lot of, you have a lack of. And it's a good thing to remember. It makes me happy because I think it makes a heck of a lot of sense,
I love that. And the great transcendentalists, Emerson and Thoreau.
Incredible people.
Incredible. And great Americans too, by the way, lived in the mid 1800s. But, I want to talk about something you just mentioned, this idea of do it now. I tend to be a procrastinator, which is actually a form of anxiety. You're afraid of something, so you don't want to do it. And
but in your case, you're probably eating something.
Yeah, that's true. Well, believe me, I have swallowed a lot of anxiety with food, and it doesn't always work out, but I try. But there was a great book, we've talked about it before, called, Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude.
Oh, yeah.
With
Peel.
Napoleon Hill.
Yeah.
No, Napoleon Hill, and a name I'll blow your mind with, of course, you know who it was, W. Clement Stone, the great insurance guy from Chicago. But he had an entire chapter in that book called Do It Now.
Yeah, and I was not aware of it, but yeah.
It's so powerful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, most people procrastinate.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Just do it.
It's kind of interesting because I had a lady that was a cleaning lady for many, many years. And just, a week and a half ago, she had a stroke. And I'm thinking, should I get somebody? Or I was thinking, maybe I can just clean a room a day and, I just
Take it
do
on yourself.
Yeah, put the TV on, listen to it instead of sitting on my rear and wasting time, So I didn't look at it as a problem as much as how to resolve that problem.
Well, we go back to that famous painter Goya, Goya.
Yeah.
Get off your,
Yeah,
and it's not ankle.
Yeah.
Or Albuquerque, as we once said.
Yeah.
Well, friends, I hope that you've enjoyed talking about this or listening to us talk about this today. And, whether we talk about prioritizing what matters, taking risks, living with purpose, don't wait for someday to be perfect, because that time may never come to do something, and make the most of every moment. I think if we really understood in our hearts that this is our lives right now, this is not a dress rehearsal. This is it.
Yeah.
So you better go do what you want, because no one's getting out of this alive.
Yeah. And you know what? If you do think positively, it's so corny that people just don't get it. People want complicated things. They love complicated things.
Right.
Okay. Love it. Simplicity, it's too simple. This is simple.
It really is.
This is simple. Start the day. Write yourself a note if you can't do it automatically. I do it automatically because I've done it for many, many years. But it really sets you in a positive way. Thank God, or whatever you think, the creator or nature. Thank for this gift you get every day.
Setting your mind.
24 hours, and you can do so much if you just Goya yourself.
We're setting your mind. We take so much time to choose our shoes, and our pants and shirts match, but we don't set our mind for the day.
Yeah, that's very good, by the way.
That's the way.
Thank God you come up with something good.
At the very end, I finally came up with something. You can have that, no charge, by the way.
Okay, good.
Well, friends, we hope you had a good time with us. We always enjoy being with you. And Norb, as always, it is a privilege and a pleasure, sir, to be with you.
Thank you. Same here. Believe me. God bless.
And we will see you next time. For Norb Savannasini, this is Al Edwards, and we will definitely see you on our next show. Thank you.